Get ready.
Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of Gullcast. I'm your host, Brendan Hall, Esports Coordinator here at Endicott. And today I am joined by a guest from somebody's nearly halfway across the world, I guess we could say. But it's always fun having conversations with people across the pond. And today, hailing from the great nation of Serbia, my friend here from Gosu Academy, please welcome Lukas Sankala. How we doing, Luke?
Dude, phenomenal. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so it's an honor and a pleasure. Lucas, I always love starting off because I get such a wide cornucopia of fascinating journeys of what your entry into esports was, like how this came about to where you are today.
Yeah, that's it's a long story. How much time do we have on our hands?
For you, I got all day.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Okay, so I started like most of us in the industry, I suppose, with a probably an unhealthy gaming obsession. I started playing other games more casually and at an early age. But when things really got bad was when I started playing Counter-Strike. So I started in Counter-Strike Source in 2012, 2013, and then when Counter-Strike Global Offensive came out in 2014, I was absolutely hooked, and I proceeded to spend probably a good 1,500 hours a year um, playing Counter-Strike. And then I didn't only want to play, but I had ambitions of becoming as good as possible because of all the time that I spent, and I used to watch a lot of pro games, and back then I was listening to the best casters, the most well-recognized casters in Counter-Strike then was Anders and Semler, and I was really fascinated with casting and how much value commentators and just like really solid broadcast talent were able to bring just to a a live feed of a game. So I said, as a Swedish kid that barely spoke, well, I spoke English, but not close to good enough. I said I wanted to
Yeah.
become a caster. So I actually started casting. I went on a grind for a couple of years where I was practicing everything from English, trying to improve my vocabulary, studying phrases, how the best casters kind of described in-game events, how they just the craft overall, and with a little bit of luck and hard work, I got some opportunities and was able to break into, I guess, the tier two scene of casting back then, which allowed me to travel a little bit around Europe, do some offline events, a little bit of studio work, which was the coolest thing that I had ever experienced. And then it kind of went on from there. I took the connections that I had gotten through my casting to start my own company, which was a production company. So we were doing remote production of online tournaments that were featured on, pro tournaments featured on HLTV. So that's kind of
Mhm.
the media outlet site for Counter-Strike. And I did that. And then a year later, I figured that instead of only producing the streams for tournaments, I thought it would be a great idea to organize a tournament. I felt like that was the next logical step. The
Mhm.
only problem was that I had no idea how to do that or how to get a prize pool, which was necessary. And I think I was 17 at that time, so I couldn't really put up a good enough prize pool myself to make that happen. So I did my uttermost to learn, okay, how do I create a tournament? How do I get it published in the right places? And how do I convince somebody to give me money for a prize pool? And with a lot of luck and I guess good timing as well, I was actually able to convince an esports betting company, in because that's Counter-Strike. I mean,
Yeah.
the entire tier three and tier two scene are funded by sports betting companies, and that's just how it is.
Really?
Um, oh yeah, oh yeah. Like every single
Huh.
there is you won't find a single tournament organizer or tournament in, like right now in the range of $10,000 to $100,000 in prize pool that is not sponsored and or majorly funded by a betting site.
Really? Is the goal of it to funnel them to betting on other sports or specifically esports? Because me, esports betting seems a little bit wild. Like, like betting on sports in general is a big gamble. Esports, because of the here today, gone tomorrow nature of esports, it seems a little bit more of a roll of the dice. See what I did there? Um,
Yeah, no, I mean, I certainly, if I ever spent, any money betting on matches, I've certainly never won anything,
yeah,
even
right,
in the
right.
esports where I would, consider myself to have some kind of expertise.
Yeah,
But no, I mean, that's what the landscape looks like, and that's obviously pretty unique to
yeah,
Counter-Strike and Dota. And that's why, I mean, the tier three and the tier two ecosystem, they are and have been thriving for, the last decade. There are so many tournaments, so many opportunities that you don't see in other esports. I mean, say Valorant, for example, tier three and tier two teams have a very difficult time because obviously Valve as a game publisher, they say, hey, here's our game, here's the APIs, everything you need, go ham, completely free market. Whereas companies like Riot Games, Blizzard, they have a very very different approach that doesn't allow for grassroots and or tier three, tier two tournament organizers to do whatever they want. And obviously, betting sponsorships for tournaments is like in Riot Games is prohibited,
yeah,
which also makes it very tough for tournament organizers to um, just do anything at all.
yeah.
Um,
Interesting.
so that's what it looked like. And that was kind of a precondition. So back then, the only sponsor that I could realistically find as a 17-year-old with no experience in sales or barely anything at all was to try to convince a betting sponsor. And as I said, with a little bit of luck, I was able to get an esports betting site. So specifically esports betting. This is very popular in Europe, in North America, obviously. Sports betting overall is a bit more regulated, right?
Yes.
Um, but I got them to throw me $5,000 for the prize pool, which means that I didn't actually have to organize grassroots tournaments and work with entry fees and go through all of the steps that people usually have to go through. But my first tournament was on the biggest media coverage site because the prize pool was big enough. We took in some pro teams, and the tournament was overall a success, which means that a few months later, um, I got to run another one with a bigger prize pool, and then that kept happening, and all of a sudden I was um, not only running a production company in quotation marks, but we were organizing fully fledged online pro tournaments. Um, so that's where I have my professional background. That's the first thing I did professionally in esports. But obviously now I do coaching, and coaching has been it's been probably my passion already back then. I loved the esports Counter-Strike, which is why I wanted to do tournament organization and all those things. But on the side, I have always done coaching. When I realized that, as soon as I realized that I don't have the personal skill or the will to put in the hours to try to go pro, I thought that, hey, I'm much better at the strategical part, so I want to become a coach. So on the side of the things I've done in event organization, I have been coaching for the last 7-8 years.
Yeah. For those unfamiliar with Gosu Academy, can you explain how that works?
What we do,
Yes. Yeah.
um, so we do a lot of things, but fundamentally, what we wanted to do, and the first kind of products and services that we put to market was based on the concept of group coaching. So I have my background in individual coaching. So I was the featured coach in FPS games, so Counter-Strike specifically, for then was the world's biggest coaching site. So I probably have a good, 2,000-3,000 one-on-one sessions under my belt. But the thing about the group coaching model is that if done right at scale, it allows us to provide far greater value to a far greater price. So what we do in our Valorant Academy, as an example, where we're market leading in Europe and North America, is that through having scaled it to a pretty good point, we are now able to offer our students at the price of $29 a month access to 3 to 4 live classes per week. So education done in a group setting. We also offer coach scrims. So that was one of our earliest features that we kind of pioneered in the industry, where we never wanted to be a video course, but we wanted to help our students apply the things that we teach them in theory. So, they can attend the classes, they can watch past classes and content in our video library that has, at this point, more than 100 hours of classes produced by professional players and coaches. And then they can come and join these scrims where, we take in 10 students, we have a professional coach with them who can, teach them how do you play this game as it's supposed to be played, on a team level. How can we, learn all the things that you have been studying?
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Um, from your and I'm curious how many obviously you guys work with some of our individual players. How many schools are you guys working with? Here in the United States.
So I'll give two answers. So currently, because as I'm sure you know, the scholastic space is very, very up and down.
Yeah. Yes.
So
Yes.
one semester it's a certain amount of schools, and then the other semester, half of them lose their teams because of students failing,
Yeah.
their grades, or it's certainly a turbulent industry.
Just a little bit.
But I would say a little bit, yeah. I would say currently we work with I think around 10 varsity programs, and then a couple of high schools. And since we entered the scholastics market about 2 years ago, so across 4 semesters, we've probably worked with about 20 individual schools.
Cool. Awesome. From your perspective, having done this as a player and as a coach, so I think what's interesting about esports coaching, like, I find sometimes people are like, well, what's his rank? What have they done? Okay, so I'm a big football fan. I'm a big New England Patriots fan. Greatest coach of all time in the history of sport, Bill Belichick. Never played it down in the NFL, but he's a cerebral strategist. He's a genius when it comes to football. And there's lots of coaches like that in the NFL who are coaching at the highest levels, having not really actually done all that much as a player, if any. Um, like, how is that different in esports? Like, what makes for a good coach in esports from your experiences?
So the best coaches, in my opinion, are extremely solutions oriented.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've always tried to focus on in my coaching, and in my personal methodology. Because if we take coaching non-professional players as an example, anybody with a sufficiently high skill level at a game. So say in Valorant, take an Immortal Radiant player who is supposed to coach a Platinum player. Anybody in a high rank can help somebody in a lower rank if coaching entails, watching a VOD or gameplay footage and then pointing out mistakes, right? So here you're sweeping the floor with the crosshair. Here you're completely out of position. Here, you're not communicating this and this and that. But the difficult thing is, how do you fix it, right? First of all, what should you do instead? Okay, so we found a mistake. to be able to communicate effectively, what are your options? What are the viable options here? And if we're talking about things like mechanical errors, then how do we fix it? Can I, as a coach, come up with, a set of exercises to help the player correct said mistakes or develop a certain quality in the game? That's what's tricky. And I've personally taken a lot of my inspiration from traditional sports.
Really?
Yeah, because I played sports throughout my entire childhood. I'm an avid tennis player still. I play tennis and paddle tennis, but before, I've done football and everything. And I like to draw like parallels to tennis, and I take inspiration from how motor learning is approached in traditional sports. So an example would be if we have an amateur player and we want that player to, we know that we identify a crucial skill. So say in an FPS game, we have mechanics that we need to be able to control. So say shooting error, so controlling your movement when you run around and shoot at things. And then we have things like recoil. So we have individual elements that we need to learn. So how do they work and how do we, tackle them individually? But then the problem becomes in a game, you're supposed to do everything at once, right? You want to be able to do this advanced movement technique while you're trying to track the opponent's head or
Yeah.
character while you're watching the minimap and trying to maintain awareness. And if you take tennis then as an example, compare it to a tennis serve, where there or any kind of sport where there are multiple components that makes that a whole body movement. So what you do in traditional sports is that you first work with isolating the movements, right? And it's a concept, and you actually work with stuff like blocked practice, so like the classic blocked versus random practice, which is very prevalent in sports. So then we take just like the tennis player he would not just go and serve immediately, but he would learn the ball toss first. He would isolate the ball toss and he would do 10 repetitions of that. And then he would work on, the shoulder movement and the racket swing. And then we get to the legs, right? So we master the individual components and then we try to do it as a whole exercise. Mm-hmm. So in esports, that'd be the same thing. If we teach somebody recoil, so how do we control the recoil, how do we control the movement, and then we can incorporate some aiming, so like basic mouse control, but the end goal is to be able to do and execute the entire tennis serve. And then I like to leverage concepts like whole part whole practice, right, where you start try to do the whole exercise, the whole movement that is very, very realistic and is going to ease application into the actual game. And then you will see when a beginner attempts doing the whole exercise is going to create errors. So you will see where the student goes wrong. So you see, okay, the recoil's flying up, or we see a lot of movement error. And then we pause, we go back to, we can isolate that part specifically. We focus on technique before we then go back to doing the whole exercise. So that would be a good example, and as like from an individual coach's perspective, I think that is very, very important, and it's just so logical when you think about how things are taught in traditional sports.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, you're in Serbia. You probably learn a lot about Nikola Jokic out there, and the NBA, and so you're probably familiar with the Boston Celtics, 18-time world
Certainly.
champs, the reigning world champions. But the head coach, Joe Mazzulla, one of the youngest coaches ever in the NBA, he's a guy who routinely draws inspiration from other sports than basketball to teach his own players. He's a big MMA fights guy. He loves watching fights. And one of the things he would do last year was show players, guys on the ground in the cage, like escaping submissions that seemed insurmountable. To draw to make a point that how your mindset is, right? How you how your composure is can allow you to escape from insurmountable situations if you just stay even keeled. And
Mm,
so I just find, I mean, even you mentioned being a soccer guy. I mean, I like to joke that Pep Guardiola, the coach at Manchester City, every time he rolls out a new formation, it spawns 1,000 podcasts. But he's a guy who routinely draws inspiration from outside of the sport, if I'm not mistaken.
mm,
And then even here domestically, I go back to Bill Belichick. You know, I told the story on the last episode that I recorded. But I learned that so there's a famous high school coach here in the United States who, if you're not familiar with American football strategy, he never punts and he always does an onside kick when he kicks the ball off. Once the ball passes 10 yards, it's live. Anybody can pick it up. So sometimes late in the game, if a team's down, they'll kick it. They'll just kind of like squib kick it and then try to recover. He would
mm.
do that after every time he scored, which is extremely wild. But he did it because of some data research he had done that says we don't value possession enough in football. So Belichick would fly this guy in. This guy from Arkansas. You mentioned Middle America, right? Your experiences
Mm.
at Oklahoma. The best coach in the NFL flying in a guy from a high school coach in Arkansas to talk to his own special teams coaches once a year. That takes a lot of humility, I think, on your end to say, I might be really good at this, but I don't have all the answers. I think that's really hard to actually practice. It's easier to
Mm.
say. But yeah, like look, every right answer is eventually the wrong one. And I find that often these are the portals into discovery for that. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super interesting, and esports is so isolated. I think obviously,
Yeah.
the best coaches in the world, they have access um to so many opportunities when it comes to professional development, right? Because if
Yeah.
if I'm super super good at a specific game and I'm hired, you know, to coach a tier one team in that specific game, I'm going to have other professionals around me, like a mental high performance coach that I would be able to learn so much from, and other staff with expertise that are important to coaching, but it's not what 90% of esports coaches have as part of their skill set. And I mean, that's why I think it's so interesting taking inspiration from traditional sports, because esports is so new. There is no I mean, there's no established there's no coaching education. If I want to become an esports coach, um, other than being exceptionally good at the game, I can't just enroll in some education that tells me, okay, this is how you coach Counter-Strike or Valorant at a super high level. And these are the tools and the methodologies. Um, it just doesn't exist. But in sports, I mean, there's been another thing in esports that we're lacking, obviously for logical reasons, is research, right? Research on
Totally,
things
totally.
like
100% agree
aim
on that one. Yeah.
training, like practice structure, but in traditional sports, which is also motor learning, there's so much interesting things, and I mean, and that's the stuff that I'm really nerdy about. I don't pretend to be an expert, but there are so many simple things that I've been able to take inspiration from, and I like to look at this, like I like to have a picture to visualize, when it comes, like apply in esports when we talk about one-on-one coaching, which stems from the three phases of motor learning. So kind of, when you start out fresh, you're in like a cognitive phase where everything that you do takes up a huge amount of cognitive demand, right? So I like to call it brain CPU. If
Yeah.
if I want to control my recoil, I have to actively think about, oh right, recoil, I have to pull it down in this way, or I have to do this and this and that, and it's just really really difficult. And then you have the autonomous phase of phase three, where everything that you do is almost happening automatically. If you look at a radiant of every high skilled player, they do all these amazing things without having to spend a second of a thought at what am I doing. They just shoot heads, they're moving around, they're repositioning. And there are so many coaches, when in educational content, if an amateur player says, okay, I want to become good like this guy, other than just playing the game, what can I do? And I've noticed that a lot of the resources, they lack this kind of perspective. They don't divide players into these different phases of motor learning, which means that we've seen a development where you have a bunch of beginner level players that follow the best player in the world's aim training routine, right? Because I
Right.
want to play like him, so logically I should do everything that he does. Um, but it's just not logical at all. So if you take somebody that is a complete beginner, so in the cognitive phase, then you have to work a lot more with isolated practice, right? More blocked practice. It's like in tennis. You don't just go with the coach and you start playing like a real game, but you do 10 backhands, 10 forehands, focus on the technique, right? Because as soon as the coach start hitting backhand and forehand, every other, or there's a randomness factor, right? As soon as the randomness factor comes in and you don't have any mental preparation, then that's when it becomes overwhelming and you mess up technique wise. Um, and it's the same thing if you have a very high level player. Why would a high level player stand in some kind of practice range and just practice recoil, right, or just practice shooting without having anything else involved, such as movement, right? But like a high level player needs to include as many variables as possible, as much randomness factor built into the exercises that he does, just so we try to make it as realistic as possible, which then helps with the transfer to the actual game.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Do we have time for a lightning round before you got to bounce off? I gotta get a few.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm
Let's.
not on a clock.
Oh, I had a couple meetings after this, so I might have a harder stop than you. But this conversation could go 4 hours, frankly, with you. This is amazing. But let's bring it home. So first lightning round question. And I don't know how much you've been able to stew on this since I told you. What is the worst piece of advice you've gotten in your career?
Yeah, well, I wanted to have a longer think about it, but then we
Sorry.
got rolling immediately. Um, the worst piece of
We can come
advice.
back to it if you want. Yeah.
I think I'll pass on it for now. It's
Cool, cool. What is here's another one. What is an unpopular opinion that you stand on?
I don't think it necessarily is unpopular, but I think that no, it's actually not unpopular at all.
Go ahead. It's fine.
Um, I I think that there's a big problem in esports, and I think a lot of industry professionals agree with me on this, which is why it's not unpopular. But there's a big sustainability issue
Big time.
with where there are so many companies that focus on, instead of the core business model, they focus on just growing their numbers, right? Growing the registrations on a certain site. And I have my background in tournament organization, where it's super popular to almost bribe gamers and do everything that we can to get activity, right? To increase our active users numbers, and all those fancy metrics that some people like to throw around. But then when it comes to transitioning that, so if we have our 200,000 users that are signed up because we're offering giveaways, and we're giving away skins, and we're offering prize pools for tournaments that are free entry, and all these things that a lot of companies do, when they then try to transition that to a model where they actually make money, or that is
Yeah.
sustainable, or even close to sustainable, it it just flops. And it's always, I think that the small companies that are doing it quote unquote the right way, and they're trying to build from the ground up, in a sustainable way, they deserve the chances, they deserve the support, and potentially the funding. Uh, but it's always the guys that start in the wrong end that end up
Yeah.
getting the most amount of support. And perhaps there's a parallel that you can draw to the scholastic space. where it's really hard, but I admire so many programs that have very, very limited resources, but they really do everything they can with the resources that they have, and they figure out ways to just grow something that is not going to go away, based off of a bad semester or bad competitive results, but it's robust.
Yeah. It's too transactional and not relational enough, you know? If you're at college and all you're doing is just signing people up to win tournaments that who knows how much money they make, but like that's their entire relationship with the school, then what have you gotten out of it? Because I don't know how it is in Europe, but here in the United States, sports is often called the front porch for a university, right? It's how a lot of
Mm,
money gets donated. It's how it raises a school's profile. You look at a school like Boise State, which I had on the podcast a few episodes ago, and when they decided to make their turf blue and invest in the football program, they were less than two decades removed from being a junior college, and now they're top 300 in the country, and obviously the very, very impressive esports program. But
mm,
that's been a great front porch for them. It's how enrollment gets up. People see how much fun they're having. But the other side of that is at a school like a Division III college like here, where these people aren't going pro, but they just love the game. Um, you know, Former athletes tend to be among the most active type of alumni when it comes to giving back to the school. And if you look at, I would venture just top of my head, just from looking at it, like the top 10 single individual donations to a school, I'd say six of them have at least six of them have been former athletes, right? Phil Knight, the CEO of Nike, former athlete at Oregon. Michael Bloomberg, the former presidential candidate, donated $1 billion to Johns Hopkins once. He wasn't on the lacrosse
wow.
team, but he was a mascot for the lacrosse team. But like, yeah, so there's a lot of reasons you invest in it, and because those people have a great relationship with that school because of their experiences playing. But if your only touch point with your school is like, well, I played a couple tournaments and then that was it. I don't know. I agree very much with you there. There's too much transactional and not enough relational. Because the relational part, I think, takes discipline and patience. You look at some of the most successful esports orgs in this country, brands like 100 Thieves, Optic, they worked for decades on building their community. And
Yeah.
it's paid off, but that requires a lot of discipline and patience, which I think we're missing right now in this industry. Um, and
I think
yeah. So go ahead. Sorry.
I think cooperation is so important, especially in
Yeah.
the scholastic space where there are so many schools. I mean, sure, at a collegiate level, but also at a high school K-12 level where
Hmm.
there are almost no resources. I mean, which is why one of the reasons why we wanted to come in, because we know that we have, I mean, through what we do in our B2C side in our global academies, we know that we have so much value to offer, and there are so many things we can help out with that are that can be extremely accessible, at a very, very good price. And I think that I'm not saying this is the case, but if there was more cooperation overall, so if schools are not necessarily competing with each other, but if schools went together, as we saw more interscholastic cooperation, like we see on the competitive front. I've spoken to several high school esports associations that do a phenomenal job in providing competitive opportunities to so many schools, right? That barely have an esports lab or anything super cool setup. But if schools cooperated more on the educational front, that could truly raise the baseline access to esports education and access to coaching and resources that kids in all the other sports have, but the esports kids, they just don't have that.
Yeah. Yeah. Looking at the entire student athlete experience, not just the competition aspect of it, but how are they with the community, right? How are they with the classroom? Are they being set up to I think a big part of developing relationships is education. How can I level these people up? Can we make you smarter, right? So, No, boy, you are just preaching to the choir
Preaching to
here.
the choir, yeah.
On this podcast, at least, I don't know what else, what other podcasts are, but like on this one, at least, you were preaching to the choir. Um, I'll wrap it up with this, Lucas. For people listening to this episode who want to break into this industry, what is the best advice you can give them?
Just go in super hard. Try to, I mean, networking is obviously important in whatever industry that you might be in, but in esports, networking is so important, and real esports experience is so important. And then, especially with how many esports degrees and diplomas that are popping up, everywhere around the world. I think what employers in esports will always value the most um, is experience, and that's a very hard thing. It's hard for a student that is just playing a game casually, but they want to get in and do something. The right kind of opportunities where you get everything served. I mean, they're not going to pop up, but you're going to have to go out there and hunt them. If I was a student and I emailed, I made a list of 50 companies that operate in the game that I'm the most interested in, or that I admire, and I sent out emails to all of those companies asking for internships, or just have showing that I have the mindset that I maybe don't have too much to offer right now, but I wanna work hard. I want to learn as much as possible, and I'm gonna try my uttermost to be an asset to the company. I think that there would be so many companies that would grant students and players that want to break into the industry, grant them opportunities, and kind of let them in. So you cannot come up with excuses, or wait for the right type of opportunity, or wait for something to get handed to you. But you have to be the most ferocious one of them all, and really find your way in, and then you go from there.
Well said. Well said. I like to say this to students when they ask about this stuff, and let's take Serbia for example. Okay, um, in your town that you live in Serbia, who do you think is the worst golfer in town?
Golf don't actually it's not a sport in Serbia.
Oh,
um
really?
I, yeah, I did, however, play a lot of golf in Sweden, where I'm born and raised.
Well, you're a tennis guy. Who's the worst tennis player in town?
As probably, I know the guy. He lives right down the block.
Yeah,
He's
no,
the
you're
worst guy in
wrong.
the league.
You're wrong. It's the guy who never picked up the racket.
There it is.
There we go. There we go. There we go. There we go.
100%.
Lucas, if for those who want to reach out to you, get in touch, what's anything you want to plug here? What's this is your time before we wrap up here. So,
Oh, putting me on the spot. Um, no, we would happily welcome any kind of conversations with the people that work in esports in the scholastic space, that run or are part of varsity programs, or even high schools that are setting up their esports programs. We have a lot to offer through our academies, and um, I am I'm sure of the value that we can bring. So I would love to have a conversation with as many as possible.
cool. What's the best way to follow your work?
Ooh, I would say LinkedIn, but I'm just so terribly inactive.
It's okay.
It's hard. But
It
LinkedIn's
goes in
probably the
waves. Yeah.
easiest way to follow and keep in touch.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Lucas, this is a very entertaining hour conversation. I'm gonna have a lot of fun cutting this one up for clips. I'll tell you that much. So, thank you for all of your time. Thank you for all the work that you guys do with our students. And yeah, just thanks for being you. This is awesome. So, we're signing off for now. For Lukas Sankala and all the great people at Gosu Academy. This is Brendan Hall at Endicott College. Be sure to catch up on all of our episodes of Gullcast. Look for us on Spotify. It's just Gullcast Endicott Esports. And you can find all our episodes on YouTube as well. Just look for at Endicott Esports and it will all be right there for you. But for now, For Lucas, this is Brendan Hall signing off. See you next time. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Be sure to follow us at Endicott Esports. See you next time.